So basically I'm going to talk, just for around about 20 minutes or so. What I'm going to do is sort of introduce to you the 3 different types of bee that we have, and most importantly, how we can conserve these different bees throughout the season, and what we can do in our allotments, in our gardens, but any community space as well, to create continuous and a variety of forage for our bees, which are of course the most important insect pollinators that we have. So we actually have 3 different types of bees. Our first type is a solitary bee, and we actually have 250 different species of these. So as the name suggests, they don't form a colony, so you do just have males and females. The males emerge out first, and they wait around where the areas where the females will emerge. They will then mate, and the females will look for somewhere suitable to lay her eggs. So this can be in our front lawns, anywhere where there's bare ground, so where it's newly been dug over, even in flower pots, they will decide to actually lay their eggs. Once they've found that spot, they'll lay 1 egg, and then they'll provision that egg with nectar and pollen. And that can take them anything from between 60 to 100 trips just to have enough food for that 1 egg. That's the level of maternal care. And those females will then eventually die. They'll be on the wing for, depending on the species, 6 to 12 weeks. And then the next year, the eggs will emerge as adults, and then the same thing will happen again with mating and laying the next generation. So I've got just 3 types of our solitary bees at the bottom there, and these are the most common ones that you will find in gardens and in any urban area. Now, one of the things about solitary bees, to compare them on a one-to-one with honeybees and with our bumblebees, is that they are very, very efficient pollinators. And the reason being is because when bumblebees and honeybees collect pollen, they mix it with nectar and they glue it onto their hind leg, which can actually slightly decrease the fertility of the pollen. Whereas many of our solitary bees have long hairs under the underside of their abdomens, which are called scopa or brush hairs, and purely by static electricity does the pollen adhere to those areas, so it doesn't decrease the fertility of the pollen. So really great pollinators, but unsung heroes really of the pollination world. Next type is the honeybee, and they are actually classed as a domesticated species. So there's one species across Europe and across Africa as well. Now, they're not actually classed as native to the UK. They were introduced for their pollination services and the products that they get from the hive as well. Now, honeybees are a very complex society, which means you have 1 queen, and then you have the worker castes. And the workers of all of our social insects, so whether that's ants, bees or wasps, are all females as well. But the difference between a queen and a worker is that workers do not have fully developed ovaries, so they cannot mate. It's the role of the workers to go out and find forage and tend the queen. The queen honeybee will stay within that hive. The only time she leaves is twice. First is her nuptial flight, where she will emit a scent to attract the males to her. They will mate with her and then they die. And the only other time she leaves is when she's actually then usurped by the production of new queens. So she will leave and take with her between 2,000 to 5,000 workers. And that's what we call a swarm. So a swarm of honeybees is the old queen being pushed out, and in that hive they'll be replaced by another queen. Now, honeybees are much more like a perennial system, because queens can live for up to 5 years, but a new queen will continuously be produced. Last type are the big fluffy furry ones, and these are our bumblebees, which is mainly the ones that I work on. Now, we did have 27 different species in the UK, but we have had some extinctions, so 3 of them have actually become extinct. So at this time of year, you're seeing the really big bumblebees, and those are queens. They're emerging out of hibernation and they're looking for a nesting site. So they're going over the surface of the ground, going into and out of holes. Now, a queen bumblebee will set up and establish her nest and will forage for the first 6 weeks of the colony development. Once her workers are produced, she is then replaced. So a bumblebee colony will live for around about 3.5 months. At the end of the cycle, the original queen, her workers and the males will die, and just a new generation of queens will survive. So it is a very short colony cycle. The queens can live for a maximum of a year, but if they do live that long, they will actually spend between 7 to 9 months in hibernation. Okay, so just in total then, we have around 278 bee species, 1 species of honeybee, which, as I said, is classed as domesticated, and we did have recorded 27 different species of bumble and around about 250 solitary bee species. So in the UK, 1 in 3 of our bee species is actually classed as rare and threatened, which means their populations have declined by a minimum of 60%, sometimes even actually over 90% of the range, the area we used to find them in. So they're now of high conservation importance. In the case of our bumblebees, we've had 2 species go extinct, but 1 is also no longer recorded here, but was only recorded temporarily for 1 year actually in Kent. A further 6 of our bumblebees are classed as BAP species, which is Biodiversity Action Plan. Again, their populations have declined by a minimum of 60%. So of course, our pollinators are of high importance, not only for conservation in terms of all of the wildflowers that they actually pollinate, and they're responsible for about 80% of pollination of wildflowers across Europe, and they pollinate 84% of our highest value crops. So that's our bees, but also of course moths, butterflies, hoverflies, beetles, wasps will also contribute towards this pollination service. So we really still need to do a lot more research into how these other species help as well, because if we can give them an economic value, it means that hopefully we can help save them as well. So bees contribute roughly between 560 to 800 million pounds per year to the UK's economy. And of course, that's a free service that the bees are providing. What I'll actually say as well is something about tomatoes. So as your allotment growers, this hopefully might be of interest to you all. On tomatoes, on the flowers where the anthers produce the pollen, it's held very, very tightly. So when another bee species or another insect pollinator visits the flower, they can't actually get the pollen off. What a bumblebee will do is unhook her wing muscles. She'll then land on the flower, and then she'll shake the flower, shaking the petals. It causes the anther to vibrate and then the pollen to drop off. But it's only bumblebees that are actually able to do this really across the northwest and central Europe. Once you get into the Mediterranean area, some of our carpenter bees can do that. But for tomatoes and many other food crops such as cranberries and kiwi fruit, it has to be bumblebees that pollinate them, otherwise they self-fertilise. So one of the biggest declines really towards our insect pollinators in the UK is over the last 60 to 80 years, we've actually lost over 97% of our ancient wildflower meadows. So this was actually during and after the end of the Second World War. So we had a lot of farming intensification during that time. Of course, we came out of rationing, so we needed to increase production to be able to feed the growing population. So the government increased use of pesticides and fertilisers that were actually used on farms. So of course, if you increase the fertility of the soil by adding nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, you actually encourage the grasses to grow, and they will dominate and outcompete the wildflowers. Many wildflowers can also fix their own nitrogen, particularly the legumes, the pea family, so they don't like artificially increased soil. They like the natural fertility of the soil. Of course, there's been an increased use of pesticides as well. So it was mainly organophosphates from the 1940s. But from the 1990s, there's been a group of chemicals called neonicotinoids, and these are mainly used as a seed coating. So before the seed is sown, it is coated in it, and then as it grows, it's evenly distributed throughout the flower. However, though, it's still found in the pollen and nectar. So those beneficial insects which are pollinating the crop are also ingesting these pesticides. It affects the motor neurons in their brain, and it can actually make them permanently confused. They don't know how to find their way back to their colony, or it can take them much longer. So of course, bees are under quite a bit of pressure at the moment. Loss of habitat, increased development, increasing urbanisation has caused fragmentation of habitat. But of course, there's something we can all do to help, and that's where gardens, allotments are so important for our insect pollinators and really so much else of our wildlife as well. Now, at Bumblebee Conservation Trust, we have an app which is called Be Kind. So you can go onto this, it's a free app on our website, and you can click on all the flowers that you have in your garden, on your allotment, or even in a community space that you might work in. It then gives you a rating, a score, and it gives you some ideas about what else you can plant as well. So bees have a variety of different tongue lengths, and each of those different tongue lengths pollinate different agricultural crops and wildflowers. So they need a variety of different flowers in our garden, so we can help each of these different bee types. So this is a really useful tool to have a look at. So bees also need continuous amounts of forage throughout their life cycle. Now, the majority of our bumblebees are active between around about March to October, but over the last 25 years, due to climate change, one species called the buff-tailed bumblebee is now having a winter cycle. So it's getting a bit confused, and because temperatures are mild, it's staying out instead of going into hibernation. So here's some of the things that we can plant in our gardens or even in our allotments as well during the winter months to be able to help these species. Come spring, there's lots of things we can plant, and I've put dandelions there as really one of the biggest things, because dandelions are such an important forage for our insect pollinators. In particular, many solitary bees do actually feed exclusively on dandelions. I apologise, the picture's obscured it, but also pulmonaria, rosemary, the willows, flower and currant, crocuses, hawthorn. Particularly native bulbs are very, very good. Highly cultivated bulbs may not produce nectar and pollen, but if you go for our native variety of crocuses, tulips, grape hyacinth, snake's head fritillary, snowdrops, all fantastic forage for our bees as well. Later on in spring, other things like our native primroses and cowslips as well. So many primroses that you might see in the bedding department of a garden centre, a lot of those, if you like, have been highly inbred. Again, they don't produce any nectar and pollen, but they do now sell the native variety. So these are great ones to have. Also, things that might creep into your allotment or your garden, which may be considered a weed, but are actually very, very good for the bees, are white dead nettle, red dead nettle, and ground ivy. So, of course, all of these are now in flower. So excellent forage for our bees, and have been termed weeds, but actually are beautiful wildflowers. Going on into summer, again, there's a variety of things that we can have. As allotment holders, you'll probably know how good comfrey is as a natural fertiliser. The dwarf comfrey can spread quite rapidly, but there is a Russian comfrey which does actually stay where you put it. So there's lots of things that we can have in summer. And late summer, some things again that might creep in onto your small holding, things like black horehound, the woundwort, and again the white dead nettles. But these are, as I said, excellent flowers for our bees, and really is a vital food resource. So if you go into any garden centre, the ones that are labelled saying insect pollinator friendly are going to be good for the bees. Also, of course, we can create wildflower areas, and these are great in allotments, in our gardens. Many of these can be grown in pots as well. The pea family, so particularly the red clovers, the white clovers, the vetches, the vetchlings, birdsfoot trefoil, again, all are very good. Because they're legumes, they can fix their own nitrogen, which means that the pollen they produce is full of protein, so it's an excellent food resource. Other things as well, like knapweed, the echium, and many of our cornfield annuals are also very good as well. So you can create a wildflower area, or in your borders, in your lawn, even in pots as well. If you did want to create a wildflower area, I highly recommend a plant called yellow rattle, because this is a semi-parasite of grasses. So if you have a very fertile area or it's very grass dense, it parasitizes grass roots, reduces their dominance, and allows other wildflowers in. So it's a great flower to have as an addition. Also, what we can put in our gardens, these are solitary bee hotels on the left. You can buy them in any garden centre or in any supermarket. Alternatively, you can just make them yourselves. And we say ideally about 12 centimetres long, a variety of holes from 2 to 3 millimetres through to 8 millimetres. You'll get a variety of solitary bees moving in as well. They need to be southeast facing, so catching that morning sun to be able to warm up. For bumblebees, the best thing to use is actually blue-tit nest boxes, and they like to nest south-southeast facing. So if you'd like a blue tit in there, clean it out over the winter months and have it north facing. But if you'd like a bumblebee, leave some nesting material in, either grass cuttings or the old blue tit nest box, and then the bumblebees will follow on after. And also, just to follow up, this is just an idea of some of the things as well that you can use as companion planting as well. So to try and obviously not have to use or not have to rely on pesticides in our allotments or in our gardens as well. So there are many things that we can plant next to the plant we actually want, which will detract away a lot of the aphids, the black fly, and they will attack that instead of going for the crop that you actually want. So there's a few ideas there about what you can actually put in your gardens, which is much more sustainable. And of course, these will flower as well. So I think that's it. My time's up. So thank you very much, everyone, for listening. So I work for Bumblebee Conservation Trust. We're a charity that is UK-wide, so we have projects all over. I'm in South Kent and East Sussex. That's my email address, and you can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We also have the Bumblebee Conservation Trust main page as well. We've got an excellent web page that tells you all about ID. As I said, it gives you the Be Kind app, and it also gives you a monthly menu of what you can put in your garden for bees as well. So do have a look at our website as well, and you can always become a member. So thank you very much for all listening.